Canadians from coast to coast are struggling to make ends meet. We are facing an affordability crisis driven primarily by severe housing shortages, high inflation affecting food and goods, and rising living costs outpacing wage growth. A common refrain that we are hearing from young Canadians resigning themselves to the fact that they may never be able to afford to buy a house. In fact, a new research from the Frontier Centre for Public Policy shows that Canada ranks among the least affordable housing markets in the developed world. Here to tell us more is David Leis. He is the president of the Frontier Centre for Public Policy and the host of Leaders on the Frontier, seen regularly here on Miracle Channel. David, welcome. Great to have you back with us again.
Good to see you, Jeanette.
Thank you. So, David, this is all it's sounding pretty gloom and doom, bad news, but this is a 2026 Demographia International Housing Affordability Study, right? So it shows Canada's housing market is severely unaffordable. So what do the numbers show?
Well, the numbers show that in key metropolitan areas in this country, housing is quite unaffordable. Not that that's a surprise to people, but we're actually less affordable than our peers in the UK as well as the United States. So it's getting worse, not better. However, there are bright spots within the Canadian scene where there are some places that are definitely considered affordable. So we have a methodology. This is the 23rd year that we've done this report with senior fellow Wendell Cox, and we do this in concert with Chapman University in California. And we look at 97 markets across 8 countries. And so this kind of data is very important to illustrate and prove the Canadian situation. And there are solutions. We can do better, Jeanette, and that's the story here.
Okay, so so many questions now. On the one hand, what went wrong? Who is accountable for all of this? Because I think you studied how many countries? Was it 8?
8 countries and 97 markets.
Yes, and Canada came out close to the bottom there, didn't it?
That's right. So to be clear, our larger cities, not all, are highly unaffordable to the point of being a crisis. There's no question about that. So if we look at, places like Vancouver, it's at 10.8 multiples, which is near, among the top in the world, which is all explained. And then we have Toronto, which is also just right behind at 7.6. But Edmonton, a larger city, is relatively affordable. It's at about 3.6 on our scale. And so those are places that we need to pay attention to. There's many cities that are smaller. If you think of Winnipeg or even Lethbridge, I mean, those are certainly much better places to live in terms of housing affordability. But we can do better. And a lot of it is, if you had to summarize an easy answer to this, it has to do with restrictive land policies. It's the price of land that makes up the majority cost of a home today in these bad affordable markets. So what's happening is we need to free up more land. We need to walk the balance better of not being overly restricted, but we need to be able to have places for people to live. Otherwise, we're really driving people into poverty.
Oh, it's just so sad and unfortunate. So I guess no surprise really that the report is showing that Vancouver and Toronto are very unaffordable. How did Vancouver become one of the worst or world's least, affordable housing markets? You're saying it's land policy, right?
That's right. They've gone overboard in terms of restrictions. There's a whole myriad of them I could cite, but there's the agricultural land reserve, which really covers the entire province. And developer after developer says it's almost impossible to find land to develop. So a lot of the planning orthodoxy or philosophy has also pursued high density developments. And some people like to live in those high density developments, but many do not. And those costs continue to rise also because of the long turnaround it takes to take a project from conception to actually building it. Often it's well over 10 years. So there's a lot of developers that simply cannot carry that kind of cost and that kind of red tape. So we've done this to ourselves, Jeanette, when you think of it. We've restricted the land in the extreme. And it's not to say that we shouldn't plan intelligently, but we've gone overboard to a point where we really don't see it is important to have not only a place for people to live, but driving towards affordable numbers. And this has been the story of Canada, which is so ironic because, well, the last time I checked, we're the second largest nation in the world. So it's not like we don't have a shortage of land.
And we have
need
so
to be
much
able to
land.
open it up.
Exactly. Most of it is, much of it is uninhabited. When you do look at places like Vancouver and Toronto, they are very attractive places to live. Vancouver is very restricted even just by the geography itself. It's got the mountains on one side and the ocean on the other. So where do you really build? I mean, a lot of developers want to build up into the sky. And like you said, people don't necessarily want to live that way. On the other hand of the part of the spectrum here, so if we jump to the other end of the spectrum, you were mentioning Edmonton. So what is Edmonton doing differently? They have more land around them, for one thing.
Edmonton is walking a better balance of available land for people to live. And it's not just Edmonton. There's other great cities. I mean, you think of even Regina, Winnipeg, but even them, even those communities are challenged in some measure by the need to plan ahead some 20 years to make sure that serviced land is available to build houses. And so we need to be vigilant about this. I think there's also a lot of high density policies that are being pursued in areas that may make sense, but in many cases don't, because what happens is if you build at a higher density, in many measures, those costs also increase per square foot. There's also an environment where many families prefer to live in a home where they can raise a family and not just be confined to a really tiny space. And that has real implications on the demographics of our society.
Yeah, exactly. How did some of these other countries sort of fare in comparison?
Well, it's fascinating. There's countries such as the United States and the UK, which are faring better, but there's still, challenge. It depends which specific market you're in. But it's fascinating. There's examples such as Singapore, and Singapore is a very relatively small nation, and yet their nation has worked together with the private sector to produce affordable housing, relatively speaking. So, there's a lot that we can learn from those international jurisdictions. And that's despite the fact that Singapore doesn't have a lot of land, but they have been able to work together to deliver in the marketplace a product where people can live comfortably.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's other countries that are turning the corner of the housing affordability crisis. I believe New Zealand being one of them. So what did they do down under?
Well, New Zealand has opened up its restrictive land policies. New Zealand previously was notorious for not only restricting land, but also imposing myriads of red tape. So New Zealand is an example where public policy changes do matter, and that's affecting their prices, moderating them, so people have hope of buying a property. And Jeanette, I'd emphasize that this policy file we have got to get right, because if we don't have affordable housing for people, we're basically eviscerating the middle class, and we don't need to. We're doing this to ourselves, our own governments, in many cases. So we need to be able to provide these kinds of solutions so that the next generation has hope of purchasing a home. In many ways, that's living the Canadian dream. So this is a very urgent situation, and we need to change these policies.
Yes, and David, an affordable housing has that ripple effect into the entire economy, doesn't it?
It really does. It affects people's, the economy in terms of being able to get on with creating more jobs and opportunity. But I think it also affects our culture. It's well known in research that if you have a nation of renters versus people who own their own property and have that kind of sense of ownership and pride, that has a big impact on your sense of well-being and your ability to feel like you're moving forward in your life. And this is something I think that many of us can relate to And I think that's something that we need to really change for the sake of our next generation.
Exactly. And of course, how higher housing costs means larger down payments, higher mortgage payments, increased household debt, fewer opportunities. So we really want to change that, don't we, for the younger generation?
Absolutely. I mean, it has really been a train wreck in a number of these communities where people don't have any hope. And I should mention as well, this also relates to the whole issue of livability of cities. When you have traffic tie-ups and housing that's not affordable, you have to live further and further away from a city to even have any hope of having a home. So that means longer commute times. And this is really impacting people's lives. If you are commuting 2 to 4 hours a day, 2 to 4 hours a day, you are undermining that person's quality of life, their ability to not only have a family life, but to be able to volunteer in the community. And it impacts people's health. And this is just utterly absurd in this nation where we are, again, the second largest country in the world.
Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says that Canada needs to build an additional 3.5 million homes by 2030 to restore this housing affordability. So we're hearing a lot of talk from Ottawa about affordable housing, but what needs to actually happen?
Well, the bottom line is we need to build way more housing units. In fact, a report just came out last week. It shows that we're actually building less, not more. And why is this? It's because of economic uncertainty and a whole series of factors, and also availability in select markets to find land. So again, we are doing this to ourselves, and this really represents a significant decline in our standard of living, when in fact, housing in the past was, well, it was a strength in our economy. In Canada, you could buy a home just 30 years ago that was maybe 2 to 3 times more than your family salary. And that's not the case anymore. So again, we are doing this to ourselves.
It seems like such a bad news story, but you said at the beginning here there are solutions, and so you've listed off the restricted land, so that needs to change. Building more houses. Anything else?
Well, there's also a whole series of what I call secondary factors that have been identified. Things such as, in many cases, the building code has been up to such a degree and captured by different interests that want to see, how do we say this, higher building standards to the point where these also bring with them significant costs. And so a house that was built, say, obviously 60 years ago is not the same type of standard as it is today. So the question again is, what is reasonable? And I think part of the problem with a lot of these measures that are taken in public policy is that they don't see the cumulative effect and impact on the bottom line in terms of cost. And what we need to do is make housing affordability the end result of all these things adding up to create really a monster when it comes to housing affordability. And that's probably a key takeaway from this as well.
Yeah, exactly. So who needs to make these policy changes? Where does that start?
Well, municipalities and provinces are really leaders in this regard. They need to be able to look at these policies and work together as a team with the private sector to be able to move the needle on getting rid of red tape, opening up land for development so that we can moderate those housing costs. And there's ways to calculate this based on, obviously the report. This report is looked at very carefully around the world, where many governments look at this anxiously every year because they see this as a proof that they are working on behalf of their citizens. And I think that in Canada, for whatever reason, we don't have enough, enough buy-in from, really elected officials and bureaucrats at both the local level and the provincial level to really address the root cause of this housing affordability crisis, pardon me.
Right. Yeah. David, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us today. And hopefully we see some changes down the road.
I agree with you.
For the better of everybody.
I agree with you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, David Leis is president of the Frontier Center for Public Policy. He's also the host of Leaders on the Frontier, seen regularly here on Miracle Channel. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.